So this is a fantastic time to be living in so many ways. And yet, on the other hand, every tap that we make on our keyboard, every time we touch our phone screens, every time we move around with a gadget in our pocket, data's being uploaded and sent somewhere, largely without our consent and often without our knowledge. So, with apologies to Charles Dickens, these may be the best of times in some ways, but I think they're also the worst of times. I mean, if you think about it another way, wouldn't we find it very odd if every morning we came down and found people rummaging through our dustbin, sort of looking through things we'd bought, letters with discarded bills and things, and then perhaps a person follows us around all day, observing where we go. They sit close enough to eavesdrop on our conversations. Maybe even more bizarre, perhaps they'd run up to us from time to time and go, "I think you want to buy this car," or "That house over there might suit you, don't you think?" I mean, we'd think somebody like that was very bizarre, and yet actually that's what technology is enabling so many companies and other organizations to do. Actually, if you look at the advice given by those who protect our national security, their advice is very clear. Aggregating bulk personal data is a huge risk. They advise governments against it. They advise people against doing that because collecting and aggregating bulk personal data is an incredibly attractive and potentially volatile asset for foreign hostile powers. And I don't think either that we should see this large-scale collection of our personal data as some sort of price we have to pay for entry to our digital age, as if it's some sort of ransom or blackmail that we have to hand over before we can use a gadget. Quite the opposite, in fact. I think we should fear the current abuse of our personal data because it's actually become the biggest risk to this amazing digital age that we're only beginning to understand.
I would ask you to help me, please, by raising your hands if in the past 48 hours you have used any of the following. Facebook. That's actually... Keep your hands up, please. That's more than I expected. I thought Facebook was for old people, he said. Okay, Facebook. Okay, what else have we got? Messenger, Instagram, WhatsApp. Well, keep your hands up, sorry, if you've done any of these. What you probably didn't realize, they're all Facebook as well, but never mind. So you're not as young as you thought. Okay, what about Twitter? Is anybody left? Yes, somebody there. Email? I think I've got everybody. Mr. President, I think the case, thank you, hands down. The case is kind of proven on an empirical basis. You know, if N equals the occupants of this house, it looks like about 100% do not in fact fear the large-scale collection of personal data. So sometimes in these debates you get this Orwellian dystopian picture that Big Brother is out there spying on you and watching your every move. That is not how large-scale collection of personal data actually happens in the real world. I became what was then called a computer lawyer back in 1982, and the following year, Sting and the Police had a great hit with a song, "Every Step You Take, I'll Be Watching You." Anybody else old enough to remember that? Great. I'm glad I'm not alone. Now, that was great at the time, but it's actually rather passé now, because that isn't actually how it works. It should update it for 2016. It'd be something like, "Every step you take, you'll be telling me all about it and broadcasting it to the world." Indeed, isn't the hope of being watched the main reason why people use what the sociologists among you, if there are any, would call performance activities? Over 100 countries around the world now have data protection laws, and you may say, yeah, but are they enforced? Do they have any teeth? Well, I would accept that in the past they have not been particularly effective. However, that is changing.
Yet I find that we live in this topsy-turvy world where increasingly the private citizen going about their private business is transparent to a state, to powerful corporations who actually want their own privacy and make a lot of effort to create laws and to stop us knowing what they're doing. So the consent for it to be meaningful and for it to be informed, we need information. We need to come to those decisions freely. We can't be coerced. And it can't really be a Hobson's choice. And this is one of the issues that was addressed earlier, is that, you know, there's been studies about when people have those, when you sign those terms and conditions that really annoyingly keep popping up on my iPhone all the time. Like every week I've had one where I have to sign this giant new terms of conditions. And I sign it because if I don't sign it, I can't carry on using my phone. It's just gone. And so for me, that isn't actually meaningful informed consent. I don't actually have a choice. I have a Hobson's choice, which is I can no longer use a product I've paid for, or I sign up for all their terms and conditions. So that is not really a meaningful choice. Then you have the state. And I'm going to start with sort of, we're not just talking about GCHQ and MI6 and the NSA. Even in Britain, when I was researching my last book, The Silent State, I tried to just create a organogram of all the databases that the state has of personal information. It was actually really difficult because there are no press releases going out from the Home Office or from the local council telling you about all the data sets they have that contain personal information about you. They tap an undersea cable and they hoover up all of the internet traffic. They hoover up all communications traffic, all telecommunications traffic. And this is not considered mass surveillance because they're not actually listening to it all. They only think that the analysis of the information is
To be
surveillance.
honest, no one cares if I have something on you. It's until you use that in a way that might harm you, and that's when we care about it. They point out the fact that it's slightly weird that logistically now data's targeted. It's a bit creepy. Look, I'm just happy I no longer receive spam emails asking me about penis enlargement, right? I would much rather receive the targeted advertising that is meant for me, right? Because that improves my life in a quantifiable way. Even if that's a small benefit, that is still more of a benefit than used to be. We also think that ignorance of the law is not a defense in the law, right? Just because you choose not to read the terms and conditions doesn't necessarily mean that that's a defense. Those things should be provided for you, and perhaps they should be provided in less legalese, but ultimately they are still there. And as long as we continue to have those things, it's not ignorance. Private people are being spied on, and this is the thing. Look, mass data collection, the way in which it works, yes, it can be tapping into internet cables, but it's millions of data points which are then looked at by an algorithm, not a dirty old man staring at your dick pics on Snapchat, right? The moment that a politician is asked, why did my loved one not come home? Why did this person not turn up my door, walk through that door and say hello to me? They're asked, why did that national security fail? Why are you in a position of failure? We live in a world where politicians are always going to be scared of national security failures. They're always going to be scared of that next terrorist attack. It's just how we deal with that and how we collect that information, how the government chooses to collect that information in order to stop things in future, because they will continue to collect this data. It's just the way in which they choose to collect that data is the issue. Given that politicians will continue to fear terrorist attacks, will continue to fear threats to their national security, they're still going to collect this data, but they're going to collect it in much more harmful ways than using an algorithm which looks through millions of points of data and never reads any specifics beyond what the algorithm tells it to. We think this leads to things like more random stop and searches of minorities and much more wide granting of search warrants within perceived high-risk communities where they knock down doors and go search through your things. Right? We want changes that make it easier to understand the system, easier to understand what your data is being collected, but ultimately we don't mind the fact it's taken without your consent if it's going to lead to a situation where people are safer. But even if it's not leading to safety, we think ultimately people are better off when the government taps into their data rather than kicks down their door. We think that's the difference in this debate and ultimately why you should oppose.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd asked me about 2 hours ago before I found out I was in this debate if I cared about the large-scale collection of personal data, I would have frankly told you that I did not give two shits. Having done a little bit of research, I can tell you that I now do care, and I can tell you why it's important that I care, and why it's important that we regard the large-scale collection of personal data with skepticism, and with a healthy dose of fear that actually brings about productive conversations, right? Because opposition are happy to concede that some things have to change, some stricter measures need to be put in place. No one points those things out unless they start caring. No one starts caring unless they get a little bit freaked out about where their personal data is going. What doesn't benefit my life in a lot of ways, and what is quite worrying about this, is that often the parties that are showing you these targeted ads are selling your data on to other parties. So even when you get yourself taken off of the internet and you go through the legal proceedings to do that, there are chances that data brokers have already bought all of that information, and the company that you asked to to remove your data from will buy that information back after you've asked to be removed. That's pretty freaky. I'm a little scared. That is an issue of consent, right? Because it means that even where you think you can consent to something, even when you think you have a reasonable choice, you don't. And these kind of companies do all they can to get away with making it look like you do have that choice, because it massively benefits them to be able to take advantage of you in that way. Why can't you get your information taken off of the internet? Because like even though you delete that embarrassing Facebook status from 2010, like Facebook still have it, right? They still claim your intellectual property. And it's not really a reasonable choice to log off of Facebook, but they still have every stupid thing I said when I was 11 on there. And some really embarrassing photos of a terrible haircut. Scary story about Target, which is actually super cool. They have an algorithm, basically, that tells them, well, they found out that like if you can get people at times in their life when things change, they're likely to start like shopping there more. So what lots of companies do is they check birth records, and when someone is born, they target that person, try and get them to like start buying their nappies there and baby clothes there. And Target sell everything, so they want to get people involved. So they created an algorithm to try and predict from shopping patterns when women were pregnant, so they could get there before other companies target their advertising and get them as customers. Freaky thing, sometimes they could predict when women were pregnant before those women knew themselves. Like, that's a little bit scary. I'm not saying it's the end of the world. It's not anywhere near the scale of a terrorist attack. But it's something to be aware of.
Well, Mr. President, I'd like to begin by congratulating my opponent, Kate, but also for giving a speech with which I'd have agreed with 100% if it had been given in about 1990. And there's nothing actually new about the collection of mass data. I suspect if you went back, I don't know what was happening actually here in about 1080, whenever it was AD, as if anyone here is reading history, they'll be able to correct me. But we have a thing called the Doomsday Book in this country, which was the first exercise in the collection of mass data. And I'm sure people even then said, I don't see why I should have to write down my humble manor house or my little castle and put it in some great book where the king's going to look at it and probably going to tax it. But if you're worried about Big Brother, then you're not worried about Big Brother's use of big data, you're worried about Big Brother. And I'm sure many people here have seen The Bourne Identity and the other parts of that trilogy. It's a fantastic film. It's really enjoyable. I do recommend it. But please bear in mind, it's not a documentary. It's written by people like me, people who write for a living. It's great fun. That's not the way the real world works. We are not living in North Korea. You are not living under the constant scrutiny of Big Brother. I think privacy and anonymity are different. I'm basically against anonymity, and I'm strongly in favor of privacy. When we go out in the world, we do not, as a rule, wear masks. You may wear masks if you go to a Venetian-style masked ball, if you go to some kind of sordid swingers club. There are places where we want to be anonymous for a very good reason, and that's fine. I think people have the right to be anonymous, but it shouldn't be the default setting. The whole basis of civilization is the trustful interaction between people who don't know each other very well, and for that, I think you need to be able to establish who you're dealing with. If you want to stay private, that's fine, but when you're dealing with other people, you do have to give away some of the details, otherwise I think civilization becomes impossible.